Week 7. And we find ourselves in the book of Judges, looking at Deborah. Now you have to, I should have a little backstory on this. When I was a kid, Judges was one of my favorite books of the Old Testament because it read like a series of adventure stories. And the ick factor was pretty high, right? We'll find that in Deborah's story just as much as in some of the others. But the problem with looking at it as a series of unconnected adventure stories, as it were, ignores the context, right? So Deborah is set in this context of the story of Israel spiraling downward into deeper apostasy with every generation. And when you get to the end of the book of Judges, ick factor just maxes out. And you're left thinking, I don't know how long this nation's going to last the way it is. And the key phrases of the whole book are, right, they could not or did not drive out the inhabitants of the land as the Lord commanded them, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So in the midst of this, you have 12 judges named. Also of, if you go through the whole list of them, decreasing quality. From Othniel, son-in-law of Caleb of, 12 men went to spy on Canaan fame, who was said to, he was described as the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. And this was like a constant. All the way down to Samson, the lapsed Nazirite, of whom it was said the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him from time to time, and in the rest of the time he basically did whatever he wanted. So in this context, Deborah was the 4th of the 12, and she's very unique. First off, she's the only woman judge of the 12. And second, she is described as a prophetess. Now, in the entire Old Testament, there are only 5 women who are described thus. So she's pretty special. And we find her in Judges chapter 4. After we find the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of the army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. So here's the situation. And when you, just as a context for comparison, when they say 900 chariots of iron, this is just only slightly less than Solomon was said to have had at the height of Israel's military superiority. So they had the military technology, and for 20 years, they ruled over the people of Israel and oppressed them. Now, we get discouraged if we cry out to the Lord for like a week and he doesn't seem to answer. 20 years is a long time. But in the midst of this, God raises up this woman, Deborah. And here's her description. A prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, who was judging Israel. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel. No bonus points for guessing how the tree got its name. But she judged the people of Israel. All the people came to her under that tree. And at one point, it says, verse 6, she sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali. She had a word from the Lord for him. Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon, with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. Now this is good news, right? 20 years they've been oppressed by this guy. And now God has said, go. You gather yourself an army. He gives them a very clear plan, first off. The number of troops, what tribes they're supposed to come from, and the location of the battle. And he gives them equally clear promises. Did you hear the language? I, the Lord, will draw out Sisera, and I will give him into your hand, right? It doesn't get much better or much clearer than that. The Lord has called Barak to free Israel from their oppressors. And what does Barak say? If you go with me, Deborah, I'll go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. Really? You think about this. We're so used to, right, the whole gender equality thing that this probably doesn't impact us like it would have the original audience. But here you've got this big, burly military man who says to this lady prophetess, who just told him, God has called you, he has given you these instructions, now go and do it. He says, only if you come with me. Why? What was missing from the promises? What was missing from the plan that he said, oh, no, this is never going to work unless you go with me? We don't have a straight answer for why Barak was like this, but we do know that Deborah says, oh, I'll go with you. But every time you see it, nevertheless, you know that there's some sort of reversal coming. The road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Again, we're so used to things being the way they are now that back then we fail to see the actual shock of this. And yet, Barak's the one whose name ends up in Hebrews 11 among the list of heroes. He did not get there on his own. But there's also a little bit of ambiguity here. Now, if you had read the story up to this point and you didn't know how it ended, when you read those words, the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman, who would you immediately think would be that person? Deborah, right? But we proceed, right? So here's the situation. Chapter 4 gives 2 verses to the battle. It's a very bald, very high-level retelling. Verses 15 and 16, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. And Barak pursued the chariots and the army to Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. And that leaves a lot to be desired. How? How did he do this? We're always wondering how. But if you were to compare chapter 5, the song that Deborah led Israel singing afterwards, you get a few hints of what happened. Starting from verse 4, when it says, Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. And then you skim down to verse 21. The torrent Kishon swept them away. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon, march on, my soul, with might. Now, normally, Kishon is a dry wadi, meaning it's only filled with water during the rainy season. But when it's full of water, apparently it turns into a perfect quagmire. If you're starting to feel like there's a bit of deja vu from the Red Sea here, you're not alone. The thought is then that these military technological advantages of having the iron chariots suddenly turned into a severe disadvantage as they were mired down. So the battle itself seems to be almost by the wayside, because the focus is given to, and this is also another thing about the military history of the Near East. It didn't really matter how many people a leader lost in battle. As long as he was still alive, he could go back home and raise up another army in time. So the goal was always to catch the leader of the army. That's where the real glory was. And here's Sisera, this leader of the Canaanite army who had been, it says, oppressing the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. He runs because he knows as long as he's alive, he can raise up another army. But the nearest place of refuge was a group of tents. Now, we skipped over this bit. But after Deborah and Barak go out with the army, there's this mention in verse 11. Heber, the Kenite, was separated from the Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and he had pitched his tent as far away as an Oken Zanim, which is near Kadesh. Now, why do we mention this? Well, we find out that when Sisera flees, he ends up at this cluster of tents belonging to Heber the Kenite. And this tent belonged to Heber's wife, Jael. Verse 17 tells us that there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, Sisera's boss, and the house of Heber the Kenite. So he thought, all right, so the nearest place of refuge would be this allied group over here. First tent he probably came to was Jael's. And who was she? She wasn't of the nation of Israel. In fact, she was the wife of a man who was allied with their Canaanite oppressors. But apparently she was not entirely in line with her husband's politics. In fact, there's a lot of things she's doing that was completely out of line of a woman in her position in that day and age. The first being that she went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, do not be afraid." Going out to meet a male guest in that day? Oh, no. The wife did not do that. Second thing a wife did not do in those times was bring the male guest into her own tent without notifying her husband. And so Sisera turns aside into her tent and she covers him with a rug. Right? So she's making it not only, she went out to meet him, she brought him in her tent, she's offering him hospitality. That was the role of the husband, the head of the household. She's concealing him, right? It's probably some sort of a goatskin or sheepskin rug or covering. And so he's just exhausted. He's desperate. He needs to get back to his stronghold. So he says, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty." And then he says, "Stand at the opening of the tent, and if a man comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say, 'No.'" So he's really confident now. He's reached at least a place of moderate safety, and he can relax. But this lady is not like others of her particular demographic. Not only Is she, I mean, if he had been less tired, I wonder if he would have wondered, why didn't she bring me to her husband? Why, even if she could have just called out for a servant or something like that and say, we have a guest here, take him to my husband. But no, she is very careful, if you watch this, to make sure nobody knows he's there. No one can interrupt her. And she gets him relaxed, gets him at his ease. You can see the tension building. It's like one of those thrillers that you watch where you know something's bad's going to happen. You're almost like yelling at the TV, like, no, don't go down that set of stairs. Only in this case, you're like, shh, don't disturb him. Let him fall asleep. Because it turns out her sympathy is not with the Canaanites. Her sympathy is with the Israelites. And she shows it in a very odd way. Odd, effective, and gory. When he falls asleep, she quietly goes and says, give me a second. Let me go get something over here. It'll make you feel completely relaxed. And she takes up a tent peg and a wooden mallet. And he's so tired he doesn't notice. In fact, by this point, he is sound asleep from weariness. Now, even as a child, this was a bit much for me. It was like, I know this is like, adventure and all, but it could have been one of two things. And I'm really hoping it's the second one, just because it would have left less mess. Tent pegs in those days were either fire-hardened wood or sharpened bronze. I'm really pulling for the sharpened bronze because I would not want to clean up after this. Because it says, she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. And then, of course, the most useless statement, and so he died. No, really? So, Barak comes by in pursuit of Sisera, because this is like where the glory is in the battle. And this lady comes out and says, hey, I think I know who you're looking for. Come with me. She throws open the flap of her tent, and there's this mess. We're only given the phrase, there lay Sisera dead with the tent peg in his temple. And now Deborah's prophecy has been made clear. It's not Deborah that this man was going to be sold into that. This is a totally unexpected woman, an outsider to Israel, but whose sympathies were with them to the point where she won the victory for them. In fact, in this entire thing, Barak seems to be so beside the point that the victory was won by God and this Gentile woman. Because if you look at verse 23, on that day God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel. And the hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. Let's go back to the victory song now. Chapter 5. Again, Deborah being one of those rare prophetesses in the Old Testament. You remember who the first one was? We talked about her a couple weeks ago. Miriam. And you remember what Miriam did immediately after the horses and chariots of Pharaoh were destroyed in the Red Sea? She went out and she sang. Well, here we are. Then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, on that day. And here, it's almost a recounting, but not a recounting of the battle, but it's also commentary. That the leaders took the lead in Israel, that the people offered themselves willingly. Bless the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. To the Lord I will sing. I will make melody to the Lord, the God of Israel. Lord, when you went out from Seir, When you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, even Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned and the travelers kept to the byways. The villagers ceased in Israel. They ceased to be until I arose. I, Deborah, rose as a mother in Israel. When new gods were chosen, then war was in the gates. Was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel? Just as a side, she's making a commentary on their situation. They went out and they decided they needed some new gods. And that rose to war, and they were unarmed. How many times in Judges do you see where the oppressors, when we get to Gideon, they couldn't even sharpen their own farm implements. They had to go to their oppressors for that, let alone have any weapons. But on a deeper level, they were unarmed, being the whole power behind their takeover of the promised land was God. And they had abandoned him. But Deborah goes on, my heart goes out to the commanders of Israel who offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless the Lord. Tell of it, you who ride on white donkeys, you who sit on rich carpets, you who walk by the way, to the sound of musicians at the watering places. There they repeat the righteous triumphs of the Lord, the righteous triumphs of his villagers in Israel. Then down to the gates marched the people of the Lord. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, break out in a song. Arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Abinoam. Then down marched the remnant of the noble. The people of the Lord marched down for me against the mighty. From Ephraim, their route, they marched down into the valley, following you, Benjamin, with your kinsmen. From Machir marched down the commanders, and from Zebulun, those who bear the lieutenant's staff. The princes of Issachar came with Deborah, and Issachar, faithful to Barak. Into the valley they rushed at his heels. And then we have a slight twist here. Among the clans of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. Why did you sit still among the sheepfolds to hear the whistling for the flocks? Among the clans of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. If you were to interpret this, this would be, the clan of Reuben thought about contributing troops to this, but decided against it for whatever reason. Too concerned about their livestock, probably. That was their excuse the last time. And then Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. And Dan, why did he stay with the ships? We're talking about, the Transjordan tribes, they didn't do anything for this. The ones who were over toward the sea, they didn't do anything for this. And that includes Dan, Asher. It would have been, Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh on the Transjordan side, Dan and Asher over on the Mediterranean side. But Zebulun is a people who risk their lives to the death. Naphtali too on the heights of the field. So you've got praise of those who came and contributed to the battle, and a shaming, as it were, of those who stayed home and twiddled their thumbs. The kings came, they fought. Then fought the kings of Canaan at Taanach by the waters of Megiddo. They got no spoils of silver. From heaven the stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent Kishon swept them away. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. March on, my soul, with might. Then loud beat the horses' hooves, the galloping of his steeds. Curse Meroz, says the angel of the Lord. Curse its inhabitants thoroughly, because they did not come to the help of the Lord against the mighty. Now, Meroz is a city that's thought to be right in the core of this oppressed area, and decided that probably they would just wait and see how things turned out. Safer that way. But as a complete 180 from that, most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Of tent-dwelling women most blessed. He asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a noble's bowl. She sent her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera, she crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. This verse was always my favorite verse of the entire song, because it's just one of those things. Between her feet he sank, he fell, he lay still. Between her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell, dead. And it ends with this curious, imaginary scene of Canaanite women looking for their armies to return and comforting themselves. Some rather derogatory reasons of why they're delaying. Out of the window she peered, the mother of Sisera, wailed through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? Her wisest princesses answer, indeed, she answers herself. Have they not found and divided the spoil? A woman or two for every man. Spoil of dyed materials for Sisera. Spoil of dyed materials, embroidered. See, they're like thinking what they're going to get out of this, that Sisera must be bringing back to them. But of course, the audience knows, right? He's never coming back. And hence the last verse, so may all your enemies perish, O Lord, but your friends be like the sun as he rises in his might. And the last line of this account is, the land had rest for 40 years. So this was the accomplishment of these two women. Deborah, sitting as judge over Israel, giving them counsel from the word of the Lord. And then this woman, Jael, who won the victory, the most complete victory, by taking down the enemy commander. And in the midst of these two women, you have Barak. Again, nobody really knows why his name was included in Hebrews 11. There must have been more to him than this story depicts. But it does not bring him out in quite a favorable light. A man who was given a promise as strong as this, the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go gather your men, 10,000, and I will draw out your enemy to meet you at a specific place, and I will give him into your hand. And he took that promise, he looked it over and said, no, unless the lady prophet comes with me. Now there are some, if you kind of look at the historical context, who are thinking that he was thinking very much along the lines of the pagan armies around them, who would take oracles with them to give them advice and to encourage them onward. As if the oracle was some sort of talisman or lucky piece that they could carry with them and ensure their victory. And yet his inclusion in Hebrews 11 suggests that he did have faith. Just possibly it was a little weak. Possibly he needed the kind of encouragement that Moses needed when he thought, oh, I could never say things like that in front of Pharaoh. And God said, fine. How about your brother? I know your brother could talk. Why don't we have your brother talk for you? Then will you go? I think Barak was kind of like that. Just my suspicion. That after 20 years of cruel oppression, he needed all the reinforcement he could get. And in the end, the victory's a victory, isn't it? Whoever gets the glory for it. I know the feeling of all the help I can get, right? I'm sure you do too. So together, these three, very unusual trio of people, managed to deliver Israel from their oppression for a generation. But of course, we know the pattern. Generation passes, another generation rises up, and every story starts the same way. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them over into the hand of, fill in the blank, whoever the oppressor is. Which is why when you read through Judges, yes, some of it seems a bit funny, and some of it is very exciting, but it should also be pretty sobering. Because the people set apart as gods, for whom he had done so much. Every generation fell into the same trap, blending in a little bit too well in their environment and not standing as distinct to the Lord. That's like the whole history of Israel, really. The question, will you obey the Lord, believe his promises, and go? Or are you going to do things your own way? But thank God that he provides people like Deborah. And even people like Gideon, Samson, my least favorite character in like the entire Old Testament. But through these people, God still achieves freedom for his people. Whether they're worthwhile people in their own right or not, God can still use them. So it's curious to me when we start to doubt whether God can use us for anything in particular. I mean, look at the people he's used so far. I think he can. It's a shorter story today. More time for comments. Any remarks you'd like to make? Anyone?
I always liked this story about Jael. I always thought God uses people, whoever he wants to use, and when he wants to use them. You know, we're always looking for these. I mean, seriously, we were probably thinking Deborah would be the key, you know, and here we have this fly-by-night person, you know.
Well, and to be honest, you think about her people were allies of the enemy. You would think there's no hope to be had in that quarter for any help. And yet, here's this spunky housewife.
When I first read this, I thought, shoot, what did I read? Went back and read it again, because you know, but the Old Testament is very violent.
Is Jael a Hebrew name? That ending with L.
I think it is not, actually.
I was wondering whether I've not carefully studied this story ever, I don't think, but I had always wondered if Jael had been a Hebrew woman who was captured with this domination, and now she was
Getting a bit of her own back.
had her chance to speak for the Lord, or hammer for the Lord, as the case may be.
If I had a hammer. Honestly, that had not occurred to me, but I think when I was reading some of the commentaries, they said that her name meant something like gazelle, or something like that. But now I do wonder.
She, by her act, then saves her people from conflict with the Israelites who prevail.
Bit like Abigail, really.
Did she get any kind of, we aren't told, but did she get any kind of revelation? That it would be.
Yeah, and I think about Rahab, right? Where everybody was afraid, and she's like, no, we know this is who this God is, so we had better do something on his side. Maybe that was true too. I really would like to know more about this woman.
It's great that we have these brief little insights into women of faith. But the record doesn't tell us a great deal about them.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to, next would be Gideon, and then his story is detailed to the nth degree. But we'd love to have more information about who these women were and exactly why they got the clear-cut roles. Why would Deborah, a mother, as she describes herself, and a wife, become a prophet and judge? Did she put out a sheep's cloth also and make sure that the Lord was talking to her?
Or was it more like Mary was like, okay, if you say so, I'll go. I don't know how this is going to work, but I'll go.
You know, this incident, Jael would have had to be very courageous to do this. And honestly, I'm thinking of pounding anything, and she would have had to been pretty strong. Because when you pound a nail, just think about, you wouldn't do that. You know, you'd have to really whack it. And
The first hit particularly.
Yes.
Yeah, you would, yeah, and
You're not going to get very many chances on that one.
And it's coincidental that I just ordered a shirt for Tay Oder that has a picture of a woman on it, and it says Jael, BC, whatever, and it says nailed it. Because I thought she would like that.
That sounds like Tay, yes. Okay.
So that's the takeaway.
Oh, on this one, what are you going to take away from this? Because for me, it was very much, God uses unexpected people. Like that surprise cameo at the end there of Jael was like, where did she even come from? She's just like there and then she's gone. But in that moment, she turns the experience of Israel. She is such a pivotal point, and we know almost nothing about her.
Well, Deborah, too, living in the same condition that all of them were, right? And you're saying that maybe they were reluctant to do anything, but she's not, right? She understands that God's speaking to me, and my faith in him, so this is going to happen. There isn't any waffling or wavering for her. She's very forthright about it.
Which women can be. Yeah.
Women can be. Yeah.
All right, well, let's
should
wrap
all
up.
women be practicing putting 10 pegs into the ground?
Do more push-ups.
Yes, well, apparently one of our takeaways is women should do more strength training. You never know what God's going to ask you to do. Now, next week I will be traveling, so Tom has agreed to step in and talk to you guys about Joseph. So we're going to kind of go back a little bit into the patriarchal period, but that will be next week.